All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to explore a question that I think gets to all of us at some point. How do we make any sense of our place in a world that just feels, well, way too big, moving way too fast, and is just way too complicated to really grasp?
You know that feeling? Like you're trying to stay afloat in this massive ocean of information and news and technology? It's completely overwhelming. And the thing is, you're not alone in feeling that way. So what we're going to do here is look at a framework for thinking about that feeling, and maybe, just maybe, find a little bit of clarity in all the chaos.
Now, before we get started, just a quick heads up. What I'm about to share isn't some set of absolute universal truths. Think of it more like a personal map, okay? It's just one way of seeing the world that I found really, really helpful. And my hope is that it gets you thinking and maybe gives you a new lens to look through too.
So, what if this feeling of being overwhelmed, what if it isn't just something in our heads? What if it's actually a reflection of how the world is put together? Let's dig into this idea that we're living in a world made of systems.
Think about it like this. You've got the legal system. It has its own bizarre language, its own set of rules, its own goals. And it doesn't always mesh well with, say, the economic system, which is playing by a totally different rulebook. That's what we mean by a system of systems. All these powerful separate bubbles, each designed to protect itself, all bumping up against each other. And here's where it gets really interesting. What if all the complexity we see in these systems isn't an accident? What if it's not a bug, but a feature, a defense mechanism? As these systems get bigger and more powerful, they start to build these protective shells to keep outsiders out. And this shell has 4 basic layers. First, there's just the sheer complexity of it all. It's so tangled you don't even know where to start. Then you get hit with specialized language, all the jargon and acronyms that only the insiders get. On top of that, you have rigid procedures, and finally, these powerful rituals. Put it all together, and you have a fortress that's almost impossible to get into. A perfect example of this? Cryptocurrency. I mean, the idea of a digital dollar seems pretty simple, right? But then suddenly, you're trying to understand blockchains and wallets and gas fees and mining. That complexity, right there, that is the protective shell in action. It creates this huge barrier where the only people who really feel comfortable are the ones who already understand the system.
Okay, so we're living in this world full of complex, self-protecting systems. So what does that actually mean for us? You know, the people who are just trying to live our lives in the middle of it all? Well, that brings us to the human dilemma.
It's like we're all walking on a tightrope between 2 pretty bad options. Fall off one side, and you're in this pit of total simplicity. Life is easy, maybe, but it's also empty, with no real purpose. But on the other side is this raging storm of total complexity, where there's so much information, so much chaos, that your brain just short-circuits. Neither one is a place you can actually live.
So, where does the meaning come from then? Well, this way of thinking suggests it's not about finding all the answers. It's about the search. It's in the struggle, in that effort to understand things that are just a little bit beyond our grasp. The act of reaching for understanding. That's what gives life a sense of purpose.
And this leads us to a really interesting, kind of weird question about our beliefs. I mean, if the world is fundamentally too complex for any one of us to fully get, how do we cope? How do we make any sense of it? The answer might be, well, a little irrational.
Just take a second and think about a belief you have that might not be 100% logical. We've all got them. Could be anything. Fierce loyalty to a sports team that always loses, or a deep connection to a certain brand of coffee. Logically, it might not make sense, but we cling to these things. So the question is, why? What are they doing for us?
What if the point of our beliefs isn't always to be factually correct, but to keep us mentally stable? Think of them like psychological stabilizers. They're like the heavy keel on a sailboat. They're not pretty, but they keep the ship from tipping over in a huge, chaotic, and often indifferent sea.
So here's the big twist. What if our irrationality isn't a weakness? What if it's actually one of our greatest strengths? This is the core idea. Our seemingly absurd beliefs are actually incredibly sophisticated survival mechanisms designed to protect our minds in a world that's just too much to handle. It's a feature, not a bug.
All right, so we've established that as individuals, we're not exactly perfect, rational machines. So what happens when we try to build societies that are supposed to be perfect? What happens when our messy, unpredictable human nature crashes into the dream of a perfectly ordered system? It doesn't matter how brilliant the plan is. Any system designed for perfect people will eventually fail because it has to be run by, well, us. And we humans have this tendency to want to accumulate power. We're definitely vulnerable to corruption. And at the end of the day, we are beautifully and sometimes infuriatingly unpredictable. And that right there is the fatal flaw in every utopian fantasy. Any system that ignores our imperfections, our weird quirks, our irrationality, our messiness, is a system built on a foundation of sand. It might look great on paper, but it's just not built for the creatures we actually are.
So, is that it? Are we just doomed to live in a world of flawed systems and absurd beliefs? It can feel that way. But what if we're just looking at the problem from the wrong altitude? What if we need to zoom out, way, way out, and look at the biggest picture imaginable?
Just take a deep breath and let this number sink in for a second. Billions. That's how old the universe is. On that kind of timescale, all of human civilization, everything we've ever done, is just a flicker, a tiny spark in an immense darkness. And yeah, that's humbling, but it's also incredibly freeing.
And this brings us to the beautiful paradox of being human. As an individual, yeah, on a cosmic scale, you're basically a speck of dust. But together, as a collective, we are something else entirely. Through shared knowledge, through civilization, we become this force that can achieve things that go way beyond our individual biological limit.
So what if that feeling of being overwhelmed isn't a sign that the world is meaningless? What if it's the exact opposite? What if the world is just overflowing with meaning? So much meaning that our little primate brains just can't possibly process it all at once. Maybe the universe is a symphony, and we're just now learning to hear the first few notes.
And that leaves us with this final thought. Maybe making complete sense of everything isn't possible right now, but that doesn't mean it will never be possible. The journey to understand is a long one, but it's a journey worth being on. And in that search, there is always hope.